Good evening, Gary.
Hey, Jay, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing not too bad. Grading papers.
Nice. End of the semester.
Yeah, part of being a professor, it's not fun.
When do you wrap it up for the semester?
Grades are due on the 29th. Like I have 160 papers to grade between now and then.
Oh, wow.
Just started this afternoon after I had a paper due last night and a CLE this morning. So now on to the grading.
That was a great session last month. Really.
Yeah, the electoral vote thing. That's really interesting stuff.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about the election tonight.
All right.
Has anything developed on the Oracle Google case?
It was argued in the Supreme Court. And so, it's probably going to be one of the decisions that comes down in June. It'll be decided sometime in 2021 before end of June, and the session ends. But it's those tough cases usually go right to the end, and so.
We'll start recording at 7. So.
All right. And then there's that, that Computer Fraud and Abuse Act case that was brought up in the election session that was argued since our last session, and so it's going to be decided in 2021 too. So there'll be some interesting computer science and technology cases coming out in the spring.
Is that different than the 230 provision?
Yeah. This has to do with unauthorized access to computers. If you have access to for one purpose, are you allowed to use it for a purpose you don't have authorization for? Or is that a statutory violation? So it'll go against a lot of like white hat hackers and stuff like that if it is determined one way. So it's an important case, I think.
Wow. Interesting. It's all merging together.
Yep, one big bundle of fun.
Okay, I have 7 o'clock, so let's go ahead and start recording. Welcome to the Desert Blockchain monthly session for December 16th, 2020. And tonight we're doing a review of the year 2020 and a little bit of a forecast for 2021. And we'll probably have a few other folks joining us. If you're not familiar with Desert Blockchain, we have our monthly sessions generally on the 4th Wednesday of the month, but in December and November, we've had it on the 3rd Wednesday because of the holidays. And we cover a variety of topics, and you can follow along on our YouTube channel, the recordings of the sessions. We also have some other events, including Desert Blockchain camps, and occasionally some hackathons and things like that. And if you're joining us as a member, you are watching on the live stream on YouTube, and we would welcome your comments in the chat in YouTube, which I'm following. And the Zoom sessions are for Desert Blockchain citizens to join and have live participation in the conversation and so forth. So tonight, let's see, here's Chad's joining us. And Gary, I'd like to introduce you, Professor Gary Marchant of Arizona State Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, and you run the Innovation
Center for Law, Science, and Innovation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. And if you're not familiar with what the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law has in terms of events and so forth, I highly recommend you follow along, because they are what I consider to be some of the leaders in the combination of technology and science and policy. And in particular, in May, they have the GETS, the Governance of Emerging Technology and Science conference, which involves about 200 leading scholars from all over the world that are talking about some of the cutting edge topics that we'll be talking about tonight. So,
Although we're moving it to October this year.
oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you haven't followed along, many of the experts and folks that have participated in the past, I think, are some of the top thought leaders and policy expert in this realm. So, Chad, welcome. Willie Masters is going to be joining us as well.
Hey Jay, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, doing well.
Good. Hey, Willie. So tonight, I'd like to keep this like a conversation, and because I don't have all the, there's so much going on in this space that it's impossible for me to keep on top of all of it. So part of what's the opportunity set is tonight is for the community to bring up topics that they think are relevant, that they think are important, and go from there. So does anybody have any questions or items you'd like to bring up before I get into a presentation? All right, good. So let's jump into a presentation to sort of set the stage for our conversation tonight. So this is a, and this actually has become like an annual tradition to look back at what's happened over the year. And in addition, we're going to put this in kind of a historical context and then take a look at the upcoming year and talk about some of the things that we might see and some of the areas that are ripe for innovation. So the first and foremost question is, why does decentralization matter? And I say this frequently, but this is called desert blockchain, and the term blockchain is sort of the moniker for all of the decentralized realm and Web 3.0 and so forth. But really what we're talking about is the difference between centralization and decentralization, both in terms of authority, technology, information, data, communications, many different realms, certainly finance, money, currency. All of these things are at the beginning or cusp of this expansion of decentralization, which is becoming an alternative to centralization. And we're going to talk about some recent incidents that I think really highlight why this question mark of why does decentralization matter? So in terms of the history of decentralization, let's keep in mind that, for the most part, we're talking about a 10 to arguably about a 5-year timeline on this phenomenon of decentralization. So the Satoshi white paper in 2008 basically kicked off a new realm of innovation that combines some constructs that had happened in the past, that had been developing in the past, but the Satoshi white paper basically brought them together into an actual usable form. And it's interesting to note that the term blockchain does not even appear in the 9 or 10 page Satoshi white paper, but the moniker blockchain was tagged to this, and that set off a set of innovation that we're still seeing blossoming here. So prior to the 2008 Satoshi white paper, we had forms of decentralization. We can talk about that a little bit. But really, we're experiencing a new realm of decentralization. And some of that decentralization is not necessarily involving blockchain. For instance, the initial public offering of Airbnb last week, which I believe on its face value raised about $47 billion. and then instantly went to $100 billion. In my view, Airbnb and things like DoorDash, which also raised, I think, about $70 billion, these innovations that are starting to do sort of crowdsourcing of services are a major alternative to the centralized realms of overnight accommodations, delivery of food and restaurant services and so forth. So when we're talking about decentralization, this is why I like the term, it goes well beyond blockchain. So let's talk a little bit about a few of the things in Decentralization 2020 that happened. And I'm just going to hit a few highlights. These are some of the things that came to my top of mind, and we'll open it up for the other folks on the Zoom to chime in and highlight your topics of decentralization that you think were most important in 2020. But one of the things that really occurred in decentralization, I think, or let's put it in terms of the centralized constructs, is I think we've experienced a disruption of trust in many different dimensions that I'm not sure has been experienced in such a profound way and such a broad global way in the past. And part of that disruption of trust involves a lack of transparency. And by lack of transparency, I mean, we are being given a lot of data on things, and it's not always clear exactly how transparent that data is. Sometimes it's not transparent at all. It's just basically, hey, we're the experts, here's the data, you should trust us. And what goes hand in hand with those two items, gap items as I've identified them, is we have very little way to verify the data and the results as individual participants in the various ecosystem. And that goes with the elections, it goes with healthcare, it goes with some of these cyber breaches that we're going to talk about in a bit. But these are three areas that I just highlighted that I think are at a high point in terms of the conversation and the realm of importance for people all over the world, for that matter. So what is the ideal? Well, here's 3 points of decentralization that I think would be an ideal, and this starts to kind of blend into the forecast for 2021. But a new realm of trust. How can we foster trust? And in the blockchain world, that is fostered by, I would say, two things. One is the reliance upon mathematics as the foundation of trust. And number two, at least for me, is that we rely upon adversarial construct where we assume that everybody in the ecosystem is dishonest, and paradoxically or ironically, trust emerges from that general blanket of distrust. And that's one of the areas that I think is ripe for the expansion of these contested realms to actually bring forth a new realm of trust. Identity, I think, is another thing that is missing, a workable decentralized identity and an identity that can span across multiple contexts. And then the third is adoption. Right now, the decentralized realm with blockchain and so forth, the adoption, there's a high hurdle for many of these things to be adopted. So that leads into the forecast for 2021. I think we have the opportunity to create something new in the realm of decentralized identity. And if that sort of innovation can happen, I think we can start to see some of the blockchain constructs, some of the distributed ledger constructs, cryptographic proofs, and things like that start to be introduced into mainstream use cases and mainstream realms. Central bank digital currencies. It's my view, and again, this is only one of the realms that we can talk about, but it looks to me like just about every central bank in the world is looking at how and when they can launch a digital currency that can serve multiple purposes and basically can leverage some of the innovation that's sort of organically emerged in the technology and the innovation and the decentralized realm. And then the next one is, I think, for the decentralized realm to really progress, there has to be a new user friendliness in the realm, and there has to be innovation and progress in the human friendly side of it. And this also, in my view, drifts into the governance and the policy around decentralization, because how do you govern something that doesn't have a central authority? And that's a big question mark. So I'm going to skip into some of the most recent events that, in my view, highlight some of the differences between centralized constructs and decentralized constructs. This week, December 14th, I was logging into my YouTube and my Gmail and my calendar and everything else, and it wasn't available. And that was a real eye-opener for me. And although the service was restored in fairly short order, there was a period of time on Monday morning when I was asking myself, hey, Jay, what if you can't get into your calendar? What if you can't get into the archives of your email accounts? What if you can't access this presentation that I'm showing you right now, because this is, done on Google Slides, and we're all relying upon Google right now in order for this entire conversation to work and to happen the way it is. The other thing, Amazon also suffered an outage. I'm not as familiar with the Amazon outage as I am with the Google outage, but again, this highlights, here you got two of the most valuable corporations in the world that have experienced outages with their critical infrastructure, which is centralized. Microsoft happened in September. So again, I'm not as familiar with Microsoft. I don't use either Amazon or Microsoft. I definitely use Google, but within a span of 3 months, we've seen the major centralized storage and data services experience outages. Twitter. In August, we saw a breach of Twitter, and someone or some group of people had access to the accounts of some of the major political and leaders in our world, business and entertainment leaders in our world, and they basically could have been communicating as if they were any one of these people, which could have had huge impacts on the markets, on security, panic, you name it. So again, this is Twitter's not as valuable as Amazon, Microsoft, or Google. However, I would say that it's certainly an influential and a key piece of communication and news, and arguably trusted information. So to take another step, in yet an even broader dimension, we were notified that there's been a serious breach that could impact our, many governments and U.S. agencies and governments around the world, as well as many enterprises around the world. And, again, it's being attributed to a certain country's hackers, but what do we really know about this? And, what do we really know about the depth and the breadth of this particular breach from arguably centralized services? So yet another realm is election 2020. And I don't even have a single news article about this, but here we are, a month and a half from the election. The election's been certified, and yet I would assert that there's still a substantial portion of the United States population, possibly the world, that has a huge question mark in terms of the integrity and reliability of election 2020. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong or anything else. I'm just saying that there's a fundamental disruption of trust around one of our foundational systems. COVID-19, no single article for this either. Again, our lives are directly impacted, and most recently, my life has been directly impacted by this. Not so much from my health, but just from family dynamics and suspicions, and who might have infected whom and all that. So, and now we've got a vaccine, and there's questions about the vaccines. And so this is yet, I would say, another fundamental realm of disruption in societal and political economic trust. So something that did happen that I would argue is a new alternative to centralized systems of storage, at least, and possibly computation in the not too distant future, is that a storage incentive mechanism was launched called Filecoin on October 15th. And this is not an endorsement of Filecoin or any other cryptocurrency, but this was an important innovation in a couple dimensions. Number one is, I would assert that Filecoin is the largest decentralized file storage incentive mechanism in cryptocurrency that's out there. And number two is that Filecoin has launched a blockchain that relies upon something different than proof of work. And so far, so good. It seems to be working, or at least there hasn't been a major breach in it that I'm aware of. I believe the Filecoin market cap is now about $1.3 billion. So it's, I would say this is a significant innovation and alternative to watch, as an alternative that is maybe not totally decentralized, but probably as close to decentralized as we could expect at this point. This is a video of a session that occurred on December the 11th. And this is a sort of a year summary of some of the key developments in the IPFS community and the Protocol Labs community, which is associated with the Filecoin launch. So that's basically about it. I will stop screen sharing and open it up for discussion at this point. Any questions, any comments? What do you folks see as things that I might have missed, might have skipped? What's the most important things in your opinions?
I got a question for you, Jay.
Sure.
Certainly there's a place in the world for decentralized things out there, but how many nodes do you have to have? I know a lot of the 3 points, and one of them is trust. But how many nodes do you have to run a decentralized system to prevent it from 51% attacks? Because really, it's not trusted unless you have enough nodes to where you can't have one of those attacks, right?
That is true. And I don't follow all the attacks that are out there. And it's my understanding that some of the smaller chains have had disruptive 51% attacks.
Right.
So, you know, I'm not an expert in the proof of work 51% attacks and the breaches that are possible with the proof of work chains. But I would suggest to you that from some of the people that I've talked to, there seems to be a social dynamic that is outside of the pure economic incentives. So there's a benefit to not launching the 51% attacks and sort of, you know, clearing the table, clearing the board, that I think has been a bigger factor than what most people would have thought if you push the clock back maybe 5 or 10 years. So is it possible to launch 51% attacks? Yes, I think it is. Are there what are called shadow consequences to doing that? In other words, will you be found out? Will people, create some consequences for you that you didn't anticipate? That seems to be at play. And you know, the biggest thing that I can point to, Willie, is that, you know, you've got the Bitcoin blockchain that is the biggest bounty out there. I think it's $355 billion now. I don't know what it's at. So Bitcoin's over $20,000 today. That's a huge bounty. So theoretically, if you could pull off a 51% attack, you could make about $350 billion.
Well, that one has so many nodes that it almost makes it improbable. But I think I read earlier this year where Bitcoin Cash or one of the other ones actually did have a 51% attack because of the few amount of nodes. So at some point, if you're going, you know, hackers like to do things just to do it sometimes too, just to show that they can, or bragging rights, or as a challenge. And really, I don't see decentralized systems as a trust factor, or it has an asterisk next to it, until you have some way, you have a volume enough of nodes to where it makes it not worth it, because there are those hacks happening.
Yep, I agree. And, you know, I don't know, but I do know that we have the real life experience of a number of blockchains. And you got to keep in mind that most of these are proof of work, with the exception of Filecoin, which is now a proof of space-time. And some of them are proof of stake, and Ethereum's trying to move to proof of stake. But for the most part, the larger ones have survived.
Yeah, I think that's because the number of nodes.
Yeah.
It just makes it impossible to do the 51%.
Right.
Separate question. Unless somebody else has something, I'll wait my turn.
Go ahead.
Well, I got a comment about that. I think that a lot of the newer blockchains are moving to like a federated blockchain so that they can avoid having that problem where they run and maintain 4 or 5 validator nodes that are centralized that they control for transactions so that they don't have to worry about that. And then they have an external layer of nodes that can be ran by anybody who wants to. Because I think that's kind of was kind of born out of this exact situation, is not wanting to put their network at risk. And then having like an open blockchain with all of those different nodes runs into numerous problems with performance and hardware situations that they don't want to run into. So they want to manage their big main node, make sure they can control the network in some respects, and then they'll secure it with like an outer layer. And so like kind of the federated thing has been kind of something to get around that. It's not as, decentralized, but it definitely it solves that problem.
Is that kind of like powering your electric car with a gas powered generator?
I don't know that.
I would say that's a pretty good analogy, Willie. And don't get me wrong, there are some other consensus algorithms that are out there like Algorand, and there are consortiums like Dash and things like that are sort of a hybrid between a proof of work and a round robin voting system. So I think we're still very much in the experimental stage and the innovation stage around what works and what doesn't work in terms of the security of these. But the point is that there's as little decentralization. Well, arguably you could say Bitcoin is centralized because of the miners, but the initiative is to spread out the source of truth and authority. And so far the major multiple node constructs have survived in an adversarial environment. Any other thoughts?
Well, I was gonna say it also kind of is like the open ones like Bitcoin and Ethereum that have the 51% attack issue. There's the problem when you want to start a new one now. The initial startup phase is probably going to have to be a little bit centralized unless you have some kind of a massive network of people who want to join your new blockchain network. And so there's kind of you have to kind of read into the project and understand what their fundamental belief system is regarding their blockchain system, because a lot of the ones that I follow will have to be centralized at first, and then over time, when they get growth and adoption, then it becomes more decentralized. But even Filecoin has this huge problem at the very beginning. Is like when there's nobody around using it, you have to run all the nodes, and then develop the network, test it, and then so your blockchain needs to, like in the future, allow decentralization, which means you have to kind of trust the team. And that's their ultimate goal is decentralization. So it's just that beginning part's tough.
And I think, we have existed with, or at least I have existed, Jay's existed with this sort of comfort and false security that, Google, which has a market cap of $1.2 trillion or something like that, or right around $1 trillion, and then Amazon's $1.5 trillion. I've kind of taken comfort in that they've probably got enough storage, enough everything, so that they're going to be rock solid. And as we just saw, though they have experienced breaches, and I'm sure there are certain sectors that are looking at those breaches closely to see how they might be, they might launch exploits in the future to, disrupt those centralized services as well. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool.
Next question.
Yep.
Or next,
Go ahead.
Next issue. I saw earlier this year, and as you're talking about centralized currencies for governments.
Central bank digital
Central
currencies,
bank.
right?
I saw earlier this year one article about how the Fed and the Treasury Department are teaming up to create standardization rules. And really, without that, government digital currencies really wouldn't work well if you can't transact and have the same, kind of platform to trade and exchange, that kind of thing. I haven't seen anything since then. And I saw that when I saw that article, I saw that as the highway to adoption for central banks. And I'm interested to know where that's at. I haven't heard anything about it or seen anything since, and I can't find anything about that. But I really see once that's done, people can jump on board and create an exchange and play whatever with those rules. But until then, it's hard to imagine anything happening with that. But have you had any updates or seen anything regarding that?
Well, the question is, who's going to set those rules?
Well, the U.S. probably will, because it's right now the rule of the dollar. But I think the first one to the punch is probably going to have very big sway in that.
Well, the European Union is also currently formulating regulations around cryptocurrencies and so forth. Now, I don't know if you're talking about just the central bank
standards, as far as standards of usage and trading.
Mm-hmm. The best thing I can say about standards, and this is a standard that I'm going to talk about that really doesn't even have the stakes on the table, like what we're talking about with central bank digital currencies. But when I was in grade school, I was told that we were going to be on the metric system, by the time I graduated. Well, look, here we are.
Still waiting.
Well,
Still waiting.
You are in many ways. A lot of the vehicles today are metric. I mean, standard is pretty much going away there.
Yeah.
In several sectors of business, it has happened.
Yeah. Well, suffice it to say, I'm well beyond the 8th grade, and the English
Adoption has not occurred yet.
It has not occurred yet. And all you got to do is look down at your keyboard to see a standard and how tenacious that standard is, which was designed to slow us down on typing. So,
although I have to say that growing up in Canada, I was told the same thing, and it did flip there.
It did, yes.
Yeah. So I don't understand anything when I go back now. All this metric stuff.
Yeah. But getting, the world central banks to agree on a standard, and I've got some experience in standard setting bodies and so forth, and it's a long process that's, just mind-numbingly frustrating. So
yeah,
it looks like China is going to be the first with the central currency. They already got it rolled out. They got it being used in 4 major cities in China right now. Millions and millions of people are now already using it. They're not waiting for standards, and they're already working with all the countries in their Belt and Chain initiative to use that currency as it comes out. So they are definitely making a play to be the world leader with their currency. The Federal Reserve had an emergency meeting about a month ago about how the U.S. should respond to this. There were some members who thought we need to move forward immediately, but there's also a lot of issues about things like privacy. I mean, if we have a central bank digital currency, every transaction will now be recorded and traced, which the Chinese government loves. But, from an American perspective, we may not be so keen about that, of having every single transaction we do recorded. There'd be no cash transactions anymore.
Well, you know what? That's already happening with this. A lot of stores not taking change.
Yeah, exactly.
It's requiring you to use the card. It's all.
But right now we have it sort of decentralized with a lot of different vendors and tools, PayPal, credit cards, all these different things. If this is a government with a central currency, with the Bank of America in charge of it, the Federal Reserve in charge of it, the federal government will have records of every single financial transaction in the country, which is exactly what China is moving towards.
Right.
Yeah, and well, along with other onerous tracking mechanisms in China,
Right.
but you know, that's part of what the importance of this conversation is. You know, the cryptocurrencies and the blockchains, the decentralized realm, because these offer an alternative. And I think, you know, when Libra was announced, which is now called Diem, that's why there was immediately congressional hearings. That's why there was a congressional contingent that went over to Switzerland to say, hey, how are you guys doing this stuff? I think that was a rather eye-opening event for, you know, our Congress, our policymakers. And in my view, and you know, we don't really know how this is going to play out, but as long as we can mathematically create these constructs that we consider to be secure, there's going to be an alternative to central bank digital currencies, Chinese digital currencies, communications, all sorts of things.
That's why I'm buying sheep. We're gonna be trading sheep again.
The Facebook project change was dramatic because when they rolled out that change, they did actually create a standard. And so when that forces a know your customer enrollment in order to create an account so that every business or user has what is called a VASP account, virtual asset service provider. And you have to register for that in order to use their parent bank account or their parent account, and then you get all child accounts. And so that is and I promise you, a few, like within a week, Facebook is trying to get broken up by the government. That is not those are linked directly with the revamp of their currency, because I don't think the government liked kind of a standard being made and them being kind of the first one, and then also to allow multiple currencies in the euro and any other European currency you want, you can launch on their blockchain with a standard. And so what's interesting is that since kind of the Fed has punted enforcing a standard as of yet, you're going to see the Facebooks of the world who are going to do it, because it's a key element to adoption for most people. And so it'll be interesting to see how this kind of rolls out. I mean, it's easy in China, of course, they're first, because when you're a dictatorship or a communist country and you force people to take your dumb system, you're going to be first. But they will also shut off your money if you post a bad tweet. so we're a little bit different.
Your spending is be tied to your social score.
Yeah, exactly. You mouth off on Twitter. Watch out.
Well, where's the petro? Where's the Venezuela the first to the market with their cryptocurrency?
Oh, I haven't followed that one too much. But I think most people are just naturally apprehensive to anything Venezuela puts out. But I don't know what kind of like
adoption it has.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's doing very well.
But at least it's the KYC element of this is not lost on the big tech companies, and they know that's crucial. And I think it's just interesting that the Fed and the large banks haven't kind of gone that way, because they already have all of your information already with all of your bank accounts now. And for them to kind of like port that over to a crypto, I don't think would be super challenging, or to like implement into their apps for your banks and things like that. It's just that they obviously haven't been able to come together and reach a consensus. So there's definitely some infighting on how that should be done. And so but Facebook is like, well, if nobody else is doing it, we'll do it. So something's gonna happen.
And you're thinking this whole talk about the breakup of Facebook is due specifically to their cryptocurrency?
Yeah, when they revamped their Diem project, they altered it dramatically. The reason that the government didn't like it the first time was because they had it backed by a basket of currencies, right, and all the other companies and stuff. And so they got rid of that and then linked it directly to the individual value of the stable regular currencies now, so that they have, so on their test net, they have like an option for which coin you're transacting in. So you pick like the euro or the USD or any other coin. I made a coin called Chad coin. And so you can make your own coins. And so this makes it, and they're all stable coins. And so now that they can kind of sign up and that they can get your company to sign up and trust their protocol, which I think actually Facebook would engender a lot of trust from most large corporations. I think they would, whereas like most of the crypto space would not get any trust from any corporations right now. That's kind of the hurdle, but Facebook will get that, and they'll sign up for a currency there. And so within a week, Facebook is being threatened to be broken up and all this junk. And I think that has a direct correlation to launching this crypto project. I don't think they like the standardization being built into it.
Well, there was a lot of the big players that were behind that fell out of the project. And I wondered if that was pressure behind the scenes to not support it like they were.
Can we, Willie, thank you. I would like to kind of move on to a slightly different topic.
Yeah, we got lots of stuff to talk about, but
because I think the standardization is important. I think the breakup of the big tech companies, that's definitely important. But there was a question in the chat on YouTube about elaborating on decentralized voting. Could we get a big picture view of how to create a voting system?
Those already exist. Those are actually very well developed. There's no, and this is just my opinion, there's no political will to do that. And
I agree.
So the corrupt system we have now stays because the government can control it. To actually make a legitimate blockchain-based system, this government, in my opinion, will not do it. Will not do it.
I agree.
It's not a hard thing.
I agree.
And those systems do exist. You can get the open source ones, but they actually have even internal ones built by the government and all that stuff. So like that's just an important thing.
Chad, I think that's definitely an important dimension, but in my view, one of the things that's holding back decentralized voting and a different voting system is identity. I think that, decentralized identity is still elusive, and we have some major players that are really, really hungry to launch decentralized identity, Microsoft being one of them.
Oh, that's definitely very true. But identity is a huge element of the voting issues we have now.
Oh yeah.
The current system. So it's like we would greatly benefit from an identity system where we can prove who people are, because we can't even do it in our mailing systems. So
yeah. So I think that, going back to the presentation, assuming that we have some breakthroughs in decentralized identity that's workable, that can be launched, maybe not in the context of voting first and foremost, but in other contexts that maybe are a little less grand in terms of scale, assuming those will work, then I think that could open up an alternative for the centralized voting systems that we currently have that, are suspect now. So that's just my view. So any other questions or topics?
So Jay, I wanted to play devil's advocate a little bit. So I'm in agreement with you on this need for the decentralized trust, for decentralized identity. I do think that's a really important trend. But couldn't you argue that all of our decentralization is actually hurting us, not helping us? I mean, like all this stuff about what's the truth about the election or the virus or the vaccine. I mean, when we all listened to Walter Cronkite, we all had the same news, the centralized news. We all, got the same information. And it seemed we were much more harmonious. I mean, isn't a lot of this ascension we have and polarization due to decentralization? Everyone's getting their information from different sources. And it's actually now hurting our democracy rather than helping it.
I think that's a great point, Gary. So I think it's valuable when you're looking at these decentralized constructs to kind of compare it to freedom of speech. Because, and this analogy was coming up for me today, but the centralized constructs and institutions, and this is an analogy that others have used, but it's like a library. You know, all the books, all the authoritative information is in the library. And in the past, if we wanted, to know, and especially when you get these, the kings and queens and the controllers of the library, if we wanted to know something, we had to go into the library, find out what it was, read it, and that was basically considered to be the truth. Now, we could talk among one another, but certainly the alternative for that centralized source of information became the free press and the ability to publish information, newspapers that could appear on every corner, and became very, very difficult to manipulate from outside sources. Now, granted, they were still centralized, but you're right. We're having disruption because we've got a ton of new channels of communication. Have we ever had a president in the history of the United States that communicated with the people as directly as our current president? I don't think so. Everything was filtered through, layers of speechwriters and everything else. So, this is a new realm. And in addition, as people from all over the world, they can communicate with our president. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that there's a channel of freedom and openness in communication that's, I would say, is unprecedented.
Your example of that Twitter hack earlier may be a great example. If we had Twitter as a centralized news source and somebody hacked it and was feeding disinformation, without these other sources, we couldn't verify, validate, and that could lead to disaster as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that one's even worse because
two-edged sword.
Because that was identity. You become Bill Gates when you get his password and you start posting on the wall, and that is a huge problem.
Yep.
And that's the identity element that is hard to go with now. But
yeah, Twitter is arguably a key source of definitive identity. And if you can get into somebody's account, take over their identity, then you're effectively them.
well, you can move markets.
You can move markets, absolutely. So.
And start wars.
Yep.
And Star Wars. That's true. But fortunately, part of the wisdom in our country stems from the wisdom of the founding fathers. And they made sure that we had 3 branches of government for checks and balances. And now, Gary, I think, we have an even greater set of checks and balances in the diversification of all this information and our ability to, communicate with almost anybody from anywhere in the world. And yes, it's disconcerting in many respects, but it's also kind of, at least for me, it's a level of comfort that I can now go out and do my own research and I can talk to multiple people, and the burden is on me to decide what is true and what is not true. What do I believe and what I not believe? So.
Yeah, but you get these people in their little cone of similar type thinking people, and now you have people who are neighbors who have a completely different understanding of reality and have no common ground anymore. And that to me is very destabilizing. It's also very ripe for manipulation by, say, foreign governments and stuff. You know, I have a neighbor who has doesn't believe anything I believe anymore. All the sources I cite, he said, are just all partisan. You know, CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Those are all captured by some, you know, conspiracy. And so he gets all his information somewhere else, and he has a completely different view of the world. He's got his gun out. He's, you know, it's a very scary world to have that happen. And we have no common source of information, of beliefs, of assumptions. It's gone.
Well, and it's also the cause and effects that are critical are starting to be blurred. So, you know, my choice to wear a mask or not wear a mask is not just my choice anymore. It's, you know, there are dimensions that are not so easy to pin down in terms of what causes what. What is the burden I bear versus the burden that the other people in the grocery store bear if I'm not wearing a mask?
Yeah, you're put into the category of like a racist or a homophobe, or I mean, it's that kind of a category. People will say mean things and throw things at you and accuse you of not caring or whatever, and become that polarized.
Yeah. So it's an interesting time, and yet I'm still optimistic on 2021. And, you know, I appreciate everybody's participation in this conversation. I think this is an important conversation. And, you know, this community the purpose of this community is to explore some of these constructs and see what we can be part of creating that can, you know, address some of these new realms that we're talking about.
Hey, you remember that, didn't you?
Pardon me?
Remember that movie Mad Max?
Yeah.
I think that happened in 2021.
Oh, really?
Uh-oh.
Well, we went well beyond 1984, but some of George Orwell's darkest concerns are starting to
We need a
reality.
boring year in 2021. After
Exactly.
nothing happened.
Well, hey, Jay, remember that blockchain conference at Stanford? Little did we know that was like the last free movement that we would be doing. Because I'm like looking back to when the world was not like it is now, and I'm like, man, that was really fun at that Stanford conference. We just went to Stanford and just talked to people about blockchain stuff, and we just really got together. And now here we are again, like rolling around to the conference again, and I'm like, damn, there's no way they're gonna do this in real life. I would be so excited if I could actually, but there's no way.
Chad's talking about the Stanford blockchain conference last February at Stanford University.
That's my marker for normalcy.
Yeah. I one of the first person that I saw was Vitalik Buterin, and he put a fist out like this, and I reached around it like I was going to shake his hand because I wasn't hip to the fist bump.
We're gonna catch you up, Jay. We're gonna catch you up.
I looked like a real
That's funny.
nerd.
Oh man. Wait, you know what, Jay? Just be glad to know he is infinitely more socially awkward than you. So
well, I was giving him a good challenge on that.
Oh yeah, he's a good guy. I like that. That's funny. Oh, but I wanted to mention one thing. The decentralized finance space also kind of grew a lot this last year. That was really unexpected. And there's a ton of money that went into that, and it's clearly going to be around. It's pulling a lot of developers. There's lots of like interesting, I wouldn't trust it, but it is going to be around, and it's pulling in development. So I'm definitely watching that closely. Anything that pulls developers into the space, and clearly when whoever has all the money to pump into the crypto space, it's being focused there. And so that it'll be interesting to watch kind of how that blossoms, because Chainlink is a big element of that, and I think they're a great piece to the crypto space. So,
yeah, that's a great point. I think that's another thing to watch is what's called the DeFi, the decentralized finance realm. And my experience, you can tell I've been around for a while. Derivatives and things like that often don't go well. So
yep. But it's going to happen though.
Yeah, it is happening. All right. Well, this is the end of our conversation for tonight. Thank you so much for participating. Our next session will be the 27th of January, the fourth Wednesday of the month. And we'll be announcing a topic sometime between now and then. So thanks, everybody. And let's look forward to a great 2021.
Have great holidays, everybody.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jay.
Bye.